Hey, one more thing before you go. What do Sacred Rage, Alchemy, Sacred Sales, and a Culture Shaman all have in common? Intrigued? What if companies shifted their culture to one that honors the human experience in service of human performance? Can we achieve that within our own lives? Stay tuned. We're going to have a conversation with a woman that broke the rules on what coaching is supposed to look like. I'm your host, Michael Herst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is Vanessa Broers. She's a corporate shaman and a wellness coach. We're going to talk about both of those. She took an unconventional journey from the C-suite to the shamanic path. She joins us in this episode to explore her unique approach to coaching, healing, and leadership transformation as she has left her mark on a renowned organizations like Reddit, LinkedIn, and prestigious universities. We're going to gain some insight into the secrets of fostering human-centric cultures and how you can achieve exceptional organizational success even in your personal life. Vanessa is not just a coach, she's a true pioneer in the world of coaching and leadership and transformation. Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. What an intro. I feel so honored.
Well, you earned it. Absolutely. 100%. So
Thank you.
thank you, honestly, for being here. I think that what you provide not only to organizations, but I think we have lost the connectiveness in humans or human beings. Would that be the right word?
Either one, both are true.
We as people, or
Yeah.
as society, I guess, and cultures, we've kind of lost a little bit of the human connection to that. I think, and I worked in a corporate environment as well as a governmental environment, and which is similar to obviously corporate, but just the organization portion of it. The military before that is one of those things that you follow these rules. It's very strict. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and sometimes you see there the loss of the human connection is more apparent.
Mhm.
I believe, but yeah, what a journey! What a journey!
Yeah, it has been. Uh, yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, we've really lost connection to ourselves.
Yeah,
And any person can know that when you're feeling disconnected from yourself, it's hard to disconnect to others. So that's happening on an individual level, a micro relationship level. So it's no surprise that it's showing up at the organizational level and the cultural level as well.
yeah. It's unfortunate, and it's like going back to COVID. And COVID was a double, in my opinion, and my wife's. It was a double-edged sword because obviously
Mhm.
we unfortunately lost a lot of people during that time period. But whenever the world kind of stopped and paused, and everybody was going, we got to get back to normal. Got to get back to normal. Got to get back to normal. But my wife got to work from home for 2.5 years, and that to us was more normal because instead of driving, getting up at 4 in the morning like we do now for 3 days a week, and driving an hour or more in heavy traffic, trying to avoid every accident on the road, spending 8 hours in a cubicle, and then doing the same drive home and getting home, and we got about a 3 hour window before we go to bed and go back and get up and do it all over again. We got to we got to go out on the back patio. We had a cup of tea. We watched the hummingbirds, and the birds come into the yard, and the rabbits jump around, and it was nice that she had a 30-second commute from the
Yeah.
patio to the desk, and you
Yes.
kind of go, well, maybe this is normal, kind of a thing. But the
Mhm.
corporate environment, it was still yelling, we got to get back to normal, back to normal. Everybody back in the office. So
Mhm.
it's I hope that today we can hopefully maybe inspire, motivate, and educate some individuals, no matter what level you are within an organization and or a person, to understand that there are some transformational opportunities for you to bring some more humanity to yourself as well as to others.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I do like to start at the beginning, so we're going to unfold your life. You ready for that?
I'm ready. Buckle up.
Buckle up. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
That's where my family's from, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Really?
My father was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Oh, where did he grow up in Pittsburgh?
Let me back up here. Allegheny County, primarily they were all in Allegheny County. Goes back about 4 or 5 generations from that
Wow.
perspective. Yeah, and they were very my grandfather was working the steel mills. I mean, we'll get off on a real big long story about Pittsburgh, but
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
but yeah, found my I remember visiting my grandparents back there quite a bit, and my father met my mother there. So yeah, it's all cool.
That's really cool. Yeah, my grandfather also worked in the steel mills, and not that many years ago, my sisters and I found a box of, oh my gosh, it must have been, it feels like hundreds. It was a lot of letters that my grandfather wrote to my grandmother, who lived in Ohio, and
Oh,
that was so far for them that they had to communicate through writing letters, and so some of my journey and the healing work that I have done has been through reading those letters and seeing how the mindset of my, steel mill grandfather was still so ingrained in my consciousness.
oh, very
And
cool.
yeah, and so I have, I can tell the story now, I can tell it later, but it was that very tied to my place of birth was and that lineage of the way that generations thought and worked and lived their lives was, it was a big part of me trying to break through that.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, well, yes, we definitely need to delve into
Yeah.
that a little bit, I think. So let's go back to this. Okay, so you grew up in Pittsburgh. What was your family like?
Colorful, colorful. I had a very, it's interesting. My parents were both alcoholics in my youth, and I share that not because it's so much defines me anymore, but it's always such an interesting question. What was your family like? So, children who experience traumatic childhoods, like there's so much I don't remember. Um, but I will say that my family, I have 5 sisters and very loving parents. My mom's a yoga teacher now, but my childhood was very confusing. It felt almost like I had 2 distinctly different childhoods. I had this vibrant, colorful, not a single person in my family, everyone's an entrepreneur, it's like that kind of rebellious, wild, free, very free-spirited, love of travel, love of the world, very close. That was like that childhood where we spent a lot of time together. And then there was the other childhood, which was very painful and very confusing and very volatile and um, very disconnected and very, very, very lonely. And so, in many ways, that contrast has really defined both how I lived my life unconsciously and then is now informing the sort of, I guess the I'm 37, so I don't want to say second half, but the next phase in a way that kind of allows me to what's the word? Maybe appreciate the wisdom and the depth and the richness that I might not otherwise have if I hadn't had that experience.
I can relate to that. We'll call it chapter two.
Chapter 2.
Chapter two. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you say here the first half, then we want to extend that a little bit farther.
Exactly. Thank you.
Uh, I do understand where you're coming from. I grew up with 2 alcoholic parents myself. Both my
Mm,
father and my mother were alcoholics, and then the intergenerational trauma that was brought forth by their parents having the same dysfunction. And I say there because both sides of it had the same kind of dysfunction. And I think that some of us that have come through that, I agree. It's been one reason I went into law enforcement actually was because I
mm,
felt that I could make a difference and help people from that perspective. And you built this opportunity for people to come out in a better understanding within themselves based on that. Um,
yeah.
I say dysfunction, and correct me if I'm wrong. I feel that we come out of a dysfunction, and we were able to take that and turn it into a positive from another direction. What did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was little growing up, I can't remember. I really can't remember when I was really little. I remember in my later teens, I actually wanted to be a neuroscientist. I was fascinated by the brain. I mean, I think as a kid, I remember spying on my neighbors and I was always taking notes and I pretended to be like a like a secret agent or something like that. So there was always this very investigative, inquisitive nature to me. But I also was really into nature and I was felt very magical. I was really tuned into the magic of life. And then so as I got older, I'm also pretty intellectual. So neuroscience was fascinating. I drew intricate diagrams of nerve cells and, was dissecting rats' brains and in college. And I just found it absolutely fascinating. And then one day I realized that if I was going to major in neuroscience, it would mean I would probably spend the rest of my life cutting up rat brains in the basement, or I would be a doctor. And both of those things seemed really, really unappealing. And so I took a big, big, big step back and went into economics.
Now that's a
It was a
broad.
hard left turn.
But I tell you what, cutting up numbers is better than cutting up brains.
Yeah. And if I look back, it's all the same inquisitive nature. It's all, how do I take this big thing that seems really macro and overwhelming and confusing, whether it's a diagnosis or a, you know, economic pattern, and how do we work it back to find out the smaller pieces and the details for what makes it work that way? And so, life unfolded as it did, and I ended up doing the work I do now, which I can still see. I joke and I say it's brain surgery, but a different way.
Well,
Energetic
exactly,
brain surgery.
exactly. I feel every time I do math, I think it's brain surgery. So
Yeah,
I
fair.
I understand that. Well, and now
Yeah.
that we have, and I won't say that out loud, just Lexi, if you get that relation, all I do now is instead of working those numbers, I say, "Hey, Lexi, figure this out for
Yeah.
me."
Yes,
So
exactly.
just a little lazy now.
Yeah.
So you graduate university? Did you go in Pittsburgh?
So I went to college at Allegheny College, which is just north of Pittsburgh. And then when I went to grad school, I went to Carnegie Mellon, which is, of course, right in the heart of Oakland, a pretty rich part of Pittsburgh.
This works. It is it is interesting. The in looking at your bio, when I had looked at it earlier, your early career was the in the C suite of a major corporation. Help us understand what is a C. I have a business degree, but let's help our let me
Yeah.
try that in English. Let's help our audience understand what a C suite corporation is, please.
Yeah. So the C-suite is where the CEO, CFO, COO, like the highest executive level of a corporation, it's their literal suite of offices. That's usually in one particular location in the building. And so it's a term that's used to sort of identify at which level of the organization you're operating the most. And it's a pretty prestigious place to begin your career. It's not that I wasn't, I didn't have a C-suite title, but that was my direct report, at 25 years old, coming out of grad school. So it was diving straight into the most kind of complex problems at the organizational level.
Yeah, especially at that age, coming in at 25 and jumping right into that level of the corporate world
Yeah.
must have been a shock in itself within that arena. I mean,
I was arrogant enough at the time.
aren't we
Luckily,
all? Aren't we all?
I thought they were lucky to have me personally. It did help though, because I mean, I really did mean it. I was pretty arrogant. And I say that with lots of love and compassion for my 25-year-old self, but it helped. I mean, I'm glad that I was, because otherwise I would have been really intimidated.
Well, especially, and when I say this with all due respect, I have two daughters that we've raised to be very confident, intelligent, beautiful young women that stand up for themselves. And I'm kind of sort of feminist on many aspects, but understanding the culture within society today, especially in going into the corporate world, for a woman, my mother grew up. Well, my father died at a very young age. My mother became a single parent in the 70s, who,
Mm.
then the opportunity for her to work was waitress, secretary. I mean, minimal. She used to do a thing. I forgot the name of it now. It was an old form of punching cards to go into a computer, and I forgot what
Mm.
the name of it is. But she that's what those were her options. At
Yeah.
that time. So, coming into and today, I still think that there are some blockages with regard to women in the corporate environment, and that the probably get in trouble for saying this out loud. It's the white male mentality that
Yeah.
I am smarter, bigger, better than everybody else, and you don't belong here.
Yeah.
So how,
That's
how did
true.
how did you overcome some of that?
For some reason, I was never that tuned into it. I think I noticed it. I can remember one man in particular. He was the C what was he? He's the C something of the human resources department. I can't remember his exact title. And I just remember thinking, man, you just don't get it. I think I was I was a bleeding heart. I wanted to save the world, and I was really passionate. And I think because my perception of it was that it was kind of all made up and it was kind of all silly. And I part of my gift that I've matured into over time is that I really have a gift of kind of seeing through people's patterns. That's what helps with the culture shaman work. But even then, at age 25, I think I could really see the depth of people's insecurity or their manufactured confidence. And anywhere there was that sort of I'm bigger, I'm badder, I'm smarter than you, it seemed laughable to me, almost pathetic even at the time. And so I'm sure that I participated in it to a degree. But I can remember a particular meeting where we were sitting around the table. It was me and all the executives. Because of the role that I played in the organization, I was sort of this intermediary where I was meant to be sort of a liaison between the executives and then the rest of the organization to help them find out what processes were breaking down. And it was so clear to me that this person was where the process was breaking down. And I hadn't bought in yet enough to this you must respect somebody just because of their title. And because I was 25 and I was sort of reckless at the time, I didn't feel any particularly high stakes about losing my job. And then I have one of my deepest values is truth. And so these sort of three things were very useful to not buy into the dynamic because I would just speak my truth and offend people. And if I needed to, I don't know, I just never really participated in it. As I've gotten older, I've become more aware of it. And it's definitely something that I've helped my clients navigate more. But there's always been this way in which I was kind of aware of it, but never really felt pulled to participate in it.
That's a good thing. That allows you to move
Yeah,
forward within that
I'm
without being
grateful.
affected by it in a negative way. Um,
Yeah.
I know that you said that I just wrote some stuff down here really quick. The internal processes. So, in understanding internal processes within an organization, we all know that there's like a CEO and there's or a director, there's managers, there's like the government agencies. You like in my department, you had a chief, you had assistant chief, you had the commanders, then you had captains, then you had lieutenants, and then sergeants, and on down the line. In understanding that process, there was an internal process that worked for us where we had to follow that. So we, as the officers would answer to a corporal or a sergeant, then the sergeant would answer to the lieutenant with everything below, and then the the sergeant would answer to, let's say, the lieutenant who oversaw what my decisions were made affecting the people below, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in regard to that, are you talking about when you change the internal processes, you work or define those internal processes from that perspective and at that level? Is that something that we all need to do from a personal perspective as well to kind of understand how those processes work and affect us throughout our lives and how we move through life every day?
Oh, I love that perspective. It was so I'll talk about it just a little bit more in the organizational sense, and then I'll come back and answer that question. So, my work was more specifically in looking at where a particular result was not being met. So, for example, I worked within a really big hospital corporation. So, if there was a huge delay on insurance payouts, to the hospital, for example, my job was to go in and find out what was broken down in the internal process within the organization that was having that payout be so delayed. And sometimes it was uh, the process itself just didn't make sense. The step A to step B really didn't make sense, or that there was some way in which one department didn't communicate properly to the other department, and then that system broke down there. So sometimes it was very much like step A, step B, step C oriented, but almost every time it also would come back to what I hear you talking about, which is more like the internal systems of authority and hierarchy, and the way that, I mean, they're both so connected. So when I bring that over into our personal lives, I would say that both of those things are still true. So if we are looking at a particular result that we are experiencing in our life that we don't like, one of the things that I tell my clients is every system is perfect for the results that it is creating. So maybe that result that you are creating is that you're unhappy with your health, or your marriage doesn't have the life and the passion and the connection that you wanted it to, or that you don't spend enough quality time with your kids, or that you can't pay your bills. Whatever that result is in your life has a system behind it creating that result. And so you can look at both of those things. Like, is the system in the way I orient my day resulting in the fact that I'm not getting to spend enough quality time with my kids? And then at which part of my day is that system breaking down? And maybe then we have to go into the authority. Maybe I'm not spending enough time with my kids because my boss is somebody that doesn't value work life balance, and I'm just obeying that authority instead of my own inner authority. So actually, we can look at that in almost every area of life the same way that I look at it in the organizational level. I think health is a perfect example of this. A lot of people are dissatisfied with their health, whether it's because they're lacking energy, they're carrying too much weight, maybe they're working with a diagnosis. So that's the result that's taking place in their life that they don't like. We can look back at the systems, the way their personal systems, how are they eating? How are they exercising? And then the authority piece is, whose authority are they following? I mean, I know you have a very personal story around different authority figures telling you what your possible results were, but then you went somewhere else who had a different opinion and you created a very different result. And so I think it's really important anytime we're thinking about our lives personally to understand that there's a system, which is a pattern of behavior that's causing that result. And then there are influences. You're either operating from your own authority or somebody else's that's influencing those behaviors. Was that too conceptual, or did that make sense?
No, that made absolute sense from that perspective. I think that, to have us to understand. I mean, before we started the conversation, I told you that, as the audience knows, we've had a lot of conversations in regard to shamans, and I wanted to kind of build a foundation for what you are as a culture shaman. We've had conversations with shamans that were health related and more spiritual related and more, I mean, from those arenas. But I find that you turning your experience and your decades of experience with dealing with this type of corporate culture as well, and how it affects, especially I mean, there's so many things we need to still delve into about the human experience, and how the human experience in the way it's presented affects performance, 100%. I told you that when I was a cop, I would park the car and I would get out and I would walk the downtown area, and I'd go into the shops and I would connect with the shopkeepers and the owners and then the people come in and out. Stop and ask them, where you from? You visiting here? What do this kind of a thing, and talk to the kids. And even at that time period, to me, that created a better experience, because most people, especially when they see a cop, it's forgive me, instant Christian. Everybody's afraid of a cop, and you really shouldn't be afraid of a cop. It's kind of one of those things that, unfortunately, the way society is right now, even in law enforcement, most people, when you have any experience with a police officer, it's because you're a victim. You're either a victim or you're a criminal. You have to call them because you're a victim, or you're the criminal and you have to hide from them, try not to get caught. So there's that whole time period in between them that they forgot we protect and we serve that community. So getting to know the community allowed me a better humanistic approach to understanding the community, and they understood me as a law enforcement officer. So for me, it helped me do my job better. I was able to perform better because I knew that in the areas that I was at, I had cooperation, I had help, I had other individuals that literally looked at me as the individual that was protecting and serving, not going, I can't drive faster than this. I right on that, hit the brake, speed up, hit the brake, speed up, just so you get the right speed, that kind of a thing. So, so I think that with everything that you had just spoken about, I'm sure that, at what point in your life did you feel that you could take your experience, when you were working this job that you were doing, were you training, were you coaching, were you teaching people? What was your position in regard to the connectiveness to what brought you to understanding the connection between the human experience and superior performance?
Well, it shifted, at the time when I was in that particular organization in that role, there was something really interesting. I had great mentors. They hired an external consulting team that sort of acted as like a mentor for me. And so I learned a lot from them. And one of the primary things that they taught me was it's never the people, it's the process. It's never the people, it's the process. And that was a way of sort of non-confrontationally helping people look at what wasn't working, because people took it so personally when a part of the process that they owned wasn't creating the result that was wanted. But I got pretty bored in that job pretty fast, even though it was really intellectually stimulating. I was too young and too restless, and I really couldn't see myself at that point, even though had I stayed on that trajectory, I could have had an unbelievable corporate career in no time at all. But I didn't want that. So I left and I went into health coaching, because I was working with my own health and I was always interested, and I was kind of doing both at the same time. And I worked and I traveled and I got my health coaching certification. And then I started working with people on nutrition, and it really very clearly as a health coach. And I did that for a number of years. And I was really fascinated by the fact that the majority of the time, my clients did not want to talk about food or nutrition. They wanted to talk about their relationships, their work stress, their depression, really the emotional world. And I was again, I was just kind of curious enough and again, arrogant enough to be like, I can handle this too. And so that sort of shifted my trajectory a little bit, because it took me back to those early neuroscience days where I was so just curious and fascinated. I have a very scientific mind. Why are we talking about this? Why is the client that I'm talking about her marital relationship more than nutrition getting better physical results than the person who comes in and obsesses about every calorie that they eat and they don't change? So I had, again, this just kind of interesting playground to watch human performance, human psychology, human experience, human results. I've always just been in this kind of torturous dichotomy between these two worlds. And that took me further down the road of intentionally exploring human psychology through the coaching lens, which is sort of different than the therapeutic lens. And I went deeper and deeper and deeper there, and I learned more and more and more there. And this is where my personal experience really started to influence my, I think, professional direction. This is about the time I was in my late 20s, where my childhood trauma really kind of started to manifest in um, uh, ways that I couldn't ignore. I was starting to feel an crippling sense of anxiety. I was absolutely obsessed with work. I would work 15-hour days and I couldn't stop. I have a term that I call the shadow of the brilliant mind, where you're really intelligent, and so you can channel kind of energy. Like, I could channel my trauma energy into work, and so from the outside, it looked really impressive. I built a six-figure coaching practice, then a multiple six-figure coaching practice, and so in everybody else's eyes, I was doing it. I was doing fulfilling work, I was making great money, I was making my own hours, I was learning more and more about how to help people, heal people, but I was breaking down in the process. And so when I got pregnant, which was unexpected and unplanned, it stopped me dead in my tracks, and it really shattered my whole sense of identity. And that is what forced me to go into a much, much, much deeper spiritual exploration of the human experience. And I got to see in that time period how, depending on how the human experience, how you're actually experiencing yourself and the world as a human, influences what you are able to do, not do, or overdo on the performance side. And so it's a very long answer to the question, but I took a very, very large detour from the corporate world until just recently, when I started doing this culture shamanic work, where I was doing one-on-one work at depth with myself and my clients to go really, really, really deep into trauma healing, and then watch how fascinating it was, how that influenced the way that they led, where before they couldn't execute on certain strategies, that, like, for example, consistency, motivation, discipline, follow through, confrontation, actually taking action, where they were paralyzed in these particular ways, they were all of a sudden flourishing. Somebody who is then working 100 hours a week, who couldn't even take a day off, was now only working 4 days a week, but getting even more results. And so I got to have this, almost like half a decade long masterclass in really watching what happens somewhat automatically to the human performance when you actually start to heal and nurture and get more intentional about the human experience.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I think that, you're talking about coaching in the first place, taking that path from the corporate executive level area and going into coaching. You obviously had an innate, you felt, at least I'm assuming, innate responsibility to help people from that perspective. And in doing so, that gave you, well, like you say, more experience in regard to that. At what point in that career did you really understand let me ask you the question this way. Most of the people that I've had interviews with who are shamans or went through the shamanic experience and learned that process, how did you come to the point where you felt that everything that you've learned and what you're helping other people do in your coaching arena, in your teaching arena from that perspective, how did you come to the point where you said, I need to get more of a shamanic approach?
Mhm.
Am I asking too
It
long?
was No, no, it's a great I love that question. It was when I got pregnant.
Yeah.
So I was working with a sort of a combination of a wealth coach, a business coach, but she went and did quite deep work. And I was quite a few years into my own personal healing journey at this time. And I was doing these really, really, really deep meditations where you would go into a trance state. And the idea is to rewire some of the trauma patterns that are kind of your brain gets addicted to. And I was sitting in a meditation, I think it was 18 days into a 21-day challenge. And I was in this really, really serene trance state. And I just had this awareness, like almost like I walked into a room that I had previously furnished, but somebody put a leopard print couch right in the middle of the room. And I was like, who put that couch there? It wasn't me. I had that same experience internally where I looked inside and I said, whoa, where did that rage come from? I did not previously experience myself as an angry person. I only ever felt frustrated and stressed and anxious, but never angry, certainly not rage. And so I brought it to my coach at the time and I said, I just happened upon this enormous, like, rage tumor inside of my being. I couldn't locate it in my body. I didn't feel angry. I just knew it was there. I could just, like, all of a sudden see it. And so she connected me to a shaman that I worked with for quite a few years because she had worked with him. And I had a session with him where he said, "Yep, you're absolutely right. You have this like enormous murderous rage, kind of where what he explained stored outside of my physical and emotional body in another dimension." And as we worked on clearing that rage, all the anxiety that I struggled with on a day-to-day basis kind of started to disappear. And then I got pregnant right after the first session. And I'll never forget it. We're so close now, all these years later. But um, he said to me in our first session, "Are you planning on having children?" And I said, "I don't think so." And he said something like, "I think that's probably a really good idea for you. It doesn't seem like an energetic that would work very well," or something like that. And then I find out that I'm pregnant, and I called him back and I said, "Did you know that I was pregnant when you said that to me?" Second time we've ever spoken. And I'm coming in hot, like, all pistols blazing. And his reaction, he said, "Whoa." It's like he didn't even notice that I was attacking him for it. "This is the coolest thing ever. And oh my gosh, this is fascinating." Just completely not tuned in at all to the experience that I was having. And he said to me, because I found out that I was pregnant, and I said to my then husband, "It feels like everything I've ever worked for is being taken away from me." And that's how it felt for me to get pregnant. And that was verbatim what Patrick, my shaman, said to me on the phone the next day. "I bet it feels like everything is being taken away from you." And I said, "It is." And he said, "That's because it is. Because this gift is a pregnancy from God to shatter your old identity because it's too small, it lacks spiritual depth, and it's not the truth of who you are." And so for the next few years, although I had done really deep work, the depth of work really went to the psychological level, the behavioral level, the performance level, and the emotional level, but it didn't go to the spiritual level, which is beyond the human, it's beyond the person. It's reconnecting you to God or life or natural energies of nature, and helping you understand that you really operate by the laws of nature, and you have to submit to higher powers. And the more you understand how to work with yourself as a human, but also a part of nature who submits to higher powers, and you can see how all those things interact, you kind of get this new playground to work in. And so at that period, that opened me up to a much, 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 much bigger playground, deeper depth of understanding about what I now call psycho spirituality. And because I experienced just unspeakably profound changes in the way that I experienced everything, there was just no way I wasn't going to start to bring that to my work.
What an amazing story, actually, especially the fact that this individual, it's like, how did you know? Kind of, sort of. That'd be my first question. I mean, you
Yeah.
obviously asked him that, but it's like, yeah, let me reflect upon this. How the heck did you know? But at the same time, we talked earlier about being presented with something in our life that puts us on a different path or a different direction, and sometimes we don't always feel that that's where we're supposed to be, and that's where you felt like everything was being taken away from you. But in reality, what it did was open the doors for where you are actually supposed to be,
That's
or
absolutely
at that point in your life where you're supposed to be, because everything you had worked for, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everything you had worked up to that point were things that you brought into your shamanistic approach to helping people now. So even though you didn't know you were going to be in that direction, you brought everything with you to help other people from that. So yeah, that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. Now, help me understand, please. In your bio, you label it, you are a culture shaman. So again, understanding that I have looked at and interviewed people who are, or had guests. I'll say, let me try it this way. I have had guests on the show that are shamans. Most of them are more from a spiritual perspective, or transforming life from the spiritual perspective. What's the difference between that and a culture shaman? Help us understand
Yeah.
that, and how it applies to us, I guess.
So the term culture shaman came to me several years into my work, and I'm not an initiated shaman yet. I'm on that path. So some of the work that I do is more shamanically influenced than the work of a traditional shaman, but very much when I'm in one-to-one work, it's quite similar. So one of the things that how I like to define it is often shamans essentially work with energy more than anything else, and the understanding that everything is and has life force energy. And if there's some sort of um, negative result taking place, both either emotionally inside of a person or inside a relationship or inside the culture of an organization, even if it's a material thing like the company's losing money, for example, it's energy. So when I work as a culture shaman, what I'm really doing is I'm just working with the energy of the organization. And shaman have a particular both gift and skill at understanding and being able to sense and see where that energy flow is disrupted. Because if life force energy is moving through the right people and the right organizations and the right relationships at the right flow, then we get the results that essentially we want to. But when there are disruptions in the flow of that energy, the energy flow breaks down. That's a clue for where the shaman goes. So when I work with in a culture, I'm really, 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 really attuned to very subtle disruptions in energy. So, for example, I was recently in a call with a client and their team, and there was a micro interaction. I mean, maybe seconds, and every one of my alerts just went up. And when the meeting ended, I got on the call with the CEO and I said, "Hey, what was that? What was that dynamic? That little thing that happened between you and that person?" And then I proceeded to say, "Do you feel like this with this person?" And I listed a couple of different, like, do you feel like there's some sort of like invisible abuse going on, was the language that I used. And actually the CEO, it was they were superior to this person that I was talking about quite significantly. And they said, "Oh my gosh, yes, that's absolutely happening." So then the next piece of what I do is, because I'm working so much with different people and the relationships as they come together, I'm bringing in something so much deeper than what's typically done in an organization. So, if that same dynamic is happening in a normal organization, they'd probably go into A, authority, B, roles and expectations, or C, company or HR policy. That's like how interpersonal relationships are often resolved. But when I go in as the culture shaman, what I'm actually looking at is how is this person's individual particular wounding interacting with this person's particular wounding. And I don't even have to know a person to be able to sense the way that that wounding is showing up energetically and then is getting communicated. So one of the things that I say when I work with an organization is I work with the true transactions. So you might be having these conversations that are based on these strategies that are rooted on these policies, but actually the true transaction is what's the most subtle form of energy that's being exchanged within an organization, in certain relationships, in a particular department. And oftentimes the regular policies and strategies, they don't go deep enough. They're not nuanced enough to see that actually, if you can't see that what's happening is this true transaction taking place, then it doesn't matter what strategies or policies you put in place. The real energies are what are going to be influencing each other. And so I help inside an organization first identify where are those disruptions in energy? Um, what's causing them within the people that are participating. And then, of course, if you have 10 people with their own individual wounding showing up, it's going to create like almost like another entity organizationally. And so I work with organizations to see how all of that is coming together and either contributing to or disrupting the direction that they want to go.
See, and you take I love the fact that you connect the human experience out of that. And you look at it individually, because most of us that have either been in the corporate world or the governmental world, which is the government is still run like a corporation. And although they don't have a CEO, they don't have a CFO, but in essence, they really do. The governor is the CEO, so to speak, in a state, for example. So, from that experience in looking at policies and procedures, even as a sergeant, I was told to handle certain things this way. And you question why. And they said, well, because that's the way it's done, is usually the answer that we are given. Because that's the way it's done, that's the procedure you need to follow. One, two, three, and four. And if you even buck that system, they kind of go, but that's not your job to buck the system. Your job is to follow these rules and policies and procedures that are put into place. And it's like, well, but there were circumstances behind it. The guy or the woman had an issue with their kids that they had to take care of, and it just popped up out of the blue, kind of a thing. But they're going, yeah, but they didn't give notice, and you're kind of going, well, you can't give notice in an emergency. I mean, it's one of those things, and I think that working from any with especially large organizations, I'm assuming that would go down to even small mom and pop shops. I'm
Mhm.
guessing.
This stuff happens in the nuclear family level.
Exactly. So, well, yeah, even from familiar perspective, that was my next question, actually. How can we understand that from a family perspective, from the family dynamic for us individually? So, if we're listening to this and we're watching this, we may not be involved in the corporate entity, the corporate world. Can that same principle be applied to us as an individual within a family unit?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, anywhere you have groups of individuals coming together, you're going to have all of these same kinds of dynamics playing out. I would say the primary difference between an organization and a family is I'm just pausing because I'm laughing because really what's playing out in an organization are dysfunctional family patterns being projected into work.
That
um,
I can actually see that. Yes.
it's really like actually somebody on our team recently said to my partner, I don't want to disappoint you. And I was like, I want to make you proud. And I was like, oh no, that is some serious dad transference. Like you got to take that back. That doesn't belong here. But really, I mean, truthfully, that is what's happening. Our dysfunctional, wounded childlike patterns that we learn about how to win, air quotes, in our family system, whether you had a functional or dysfunctional family, you learned there were things that would get you love and approval and belonging. We take those same patterns into work. And then in the workplace, it looks like, are you getting results? But in the family dynamic, the air quotes results are the amount of love and approval and security and belonging you feel in your family. So in many ways, when we're with our family dynamics, we're still trying to get results. We're trying to win. It's just so much less conscious. We slip into this automatic behavior, automatic relating. Everybody, we always say in the spiritual world, like, if you think you're healed, go spend time with your family and you'll find out
Yes.
just how healed you are. But in the family dynamic, for the last, I don't know, probably 3 years, when I would go home, even though my parents don't drink anymore, we're all relatively healed. I would notice that I would go home and I'm typically loud and playful and funny and very participatory. But I would notice that in my family setting, I would kind of shrink back into this kind of disassociated, disengaged state. And so it was interesting to notice that my just automatic behavior would change when I got around my family, and so would the rest of my families. And so we would get together for holidays and we would expect it to be really fun. And it would instead feel kind of like this disappointing and confusing experience where nothing really happened, but we didn't have the joy and the connectivity and the intimacy that we wanted to have. And so, because this is the work I do, I've kind of been pulling it apart for the last couple of years. And what happens is, in a family dynamic, there's different layers to what's happening. So, from the culture shaman lens, you have the sort of what I would call like the what is the true transaction of the family dynamic? In other words, what are the unspoken rules of belonging? What are the unspoken rules of love? What are the unspoken rules of approval? So For example, are you allowed to be more successful than your sibling? Or can you outshine your mother? There's all these really interesting unspoken rules of the family that if everybody's in agreement with, then everything's air quotes okay. And these are typically you can answer this question based on looking back at your childhood. Like what was the overall vibe of your family as a child? And most people don't realize that they're still participating or feel forced to participate and whatever those unspoken rules, whatever that vibe was, we feel the need to maintain or not disrupt. So then when you have people who then have grown up, they've done varying degrees of their own self-development, personal healing, or, just continued development as a human on the planet, you're not the same person that you were. So then you have these family units coming back together where the people by nature have outgrown the old dynamic, but still feel like they have to participate in and uphold it. And so that creates kind of different levels of internal and external conflict. And so, the same way that you would work in an organization, you would come back to the personal level and just kind of look at where is this. If the result that we want is a happy Thanksgiving with lots of joy and laughter, then where are the energetic disruptions? It's like, oh, my Aunt Susie is way too drunk, and, this person breaks out into this childlike dynamic, and I still feel like I have to eat everything my mother puts on the table because I have a codependent relationship with her, and it's like all of a sudden you can see that there's these energetic undercurrents that are contributing. And then once you see what those are, you can decide whether or not you want to participate in them consciously. Now, that sounds simpler than it actually is, but that's how it works at the family level.
Yeah, I'm sitting here grinning because it's like, yeah, I can see all of that
Yeah.
taking place and pulling into that factor. I think you're saying that, and I'm thinking, my brother's always going, "Hey, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this," and then, do you remember when you did that? I mean, we still,
Yes.
well, I'll say it out loud. It should be a secret, but I'm 64 years old. He's 61 years old, and we're
Yeah.
still playing that game.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, it blows me away. When you stop thinking about it, and even after I hang up the phone, I look at my wife and I say, "Are you kidding me?" He's, and even though I recognize it, the game is still being played.
And the thing about stepping out of the game, I think for most people, we can at least somewhat consciously recognize what the games are. What most people don't quite realize is why they're still playing. And
Yeah.
when we realize that we are still playing because not playing compromises some sense of love or acceptance or approval, and what we would say is, oh, well, they'll get mad at me. It's like, yeah, they might get mad at you, but that's in my work what I call the sovereign price, like the price you pay for making a sovereign individual choice. And if we make enough of those choices, the relationship will adjust. The relationship will adjust.
Moving
But
forward.
we have to understand, again, this is part of what I call what's the true transaction? Like, what are you getting out of playing the game? What do you get to keep and what do you get to avoid losing? And when you start to realize, like, oh, I'm not setting boundaries with my in-law who gets too drunk and I don't want to spend time with them because then I look like the jerk that ruined the family fun, even though I was actually just setting a very healthy boundary for myself. And, growing up in an alcoholic family, boundaries aren't really something that exist. So first I have to even learn to recognize that there's a boundary being violated or that there's one that
Yeah.
needs to be put in place. And then if I put it in place, there's a consequence. And and so that part of the disengaging is where the real healing comes. The real healing is when you actually choose a different pattern, when you choose and you pay the consequence, which can be very painful. But actually that's where I say, like, you can do all the healing you want inside a vacuum, but until you start to change the way you relate to your mom and siblings.
So I can't lock my brother in a closet and just, put a chair outside the door.
It's always just so much easier when it's somebody else's fault, like just get them out of the picture.
Yeah, see, just put him in there, put it there, put the chair up to the way, the doorknob, and yeah, it works.
Yeah.
No, in all seriousness, though, I think that the coming in, whether it be your professional life or your personal life, I think that those aspects are extremely important to understand that balance. And I think
Mhm.
that, maintain that balance within ourselves and recognizing, those things that you just spoke about, recognizing those things and recognizing the behaviors and the patterns and even from a corporate perspective, looking how do I handle my employees underneath me? Am I
Mhm.
bringing just a corporate wall up in front of me, saying that because I am a CEO, because I am the president, because I am the CFO, because I am the boss, I am the director, that you will do it just because of that? Or am I bringing the human perspective of it and thinking about, although these are my employees, they are also people. They have
Mhm.
lives. They have husbands, wives, spouses, kids, grandkids, aunts, uncles, moms, dads. I could just keep going, 40 or 50 generations. You know what I mean? And really understand that bringing the human capacity, the humanity side of managing people gives you a better opportunity to get better productivity. Doing that
Mhm.
within our own lives allows us to have, I won't say productivity, at least for now I'm learned from this talk that we've had, not necessarily more productivity, but more happiness out of the relationship we have with our family and how that family dynamic can be moved forward in a very positive way instead of walking out of the room going, man, I wish I wouldn't do that. We have to come back next year, because I've done that. We walked out of those situations, the family thing where you kind of going, same thing. Somebody was too drunk, somebody was this, boisterous, loud, whatever the case may be. And, we walk out of there going, man, I don't want to do this again next year.
Yeah. Yep.
The
Exactly.
situation. So, in regard to that, I mean, this hour has just flown right by. Um, so we could talk for another hour, but obviously we have other lives. Like, we need to do stuff. Boundaries, right? Boundaries.
Right. That's so
So, do you have any maybe tips or tricks that we won't call it trips? We'll just call it tips. Do you have any suggestions or tips for anybody out here who is either an employee or an executive and or just a member of a family that needs to refocus on what's most important for us? Do you have any
Yeah.
tips on how to recognize at that point we can take action?
Yeah, I have 3 questions that it actually doesn't matter if you're asking this in the professional arena in a dynamic that's just with you and yourself, like something you're stuck on, or in a relationship with another family member. There's 3 questions that I ask, and I'll tell you what they are, but I'll set just a little bit of context. They are a little tricky, like, they're not the kind of question you'll be used to asking. They'll kind of feel like a brain puzzle. That's a good thing. If the first answer is, "I don't know," that's a good thing. They're designed to push you into new thought patterns, not repeating the old thought patterns. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that, they're specifically intended to take you out of the center. So most of us relate to everything as if we are the center of the desire, the cause, and the inadequacy. And so this is about removing blame from yourself and removing blame from anybody else. So that's what these questions are designed to do so that you can actually create a new outcome. So the first question is, what has my attention? What has my attention? Very literally, what has my attention? Well, I'm stressed. I don't like the way that my brother is talking to me. I don't understand, like, that he keeps asking me the same question. My attention is on the fact that we're in the same specific pattern again. My attention is on the fact that I'm irritated and he's annoying, or, whatever has your attention. Like, very literally, it could be what has my attention is my pinging email box over and over and over again. So, very specifically, what has your attention? What can you point to in the dynamic? The second question is, what is wanted? Which is a very different question than what do I want? Again, remember, these questions are designed to take you out of the center of the universe. So, almost like you're an observer looking in at the dynamic, what is wanted here? Like, what's trying to come through? Because anywhere we have a breakdown, this is another, I think, partly shamanic perspective. It's like there's nothing bad to a shaman. There's no problems to a shaman. There's only energy creating a particular outcome. And if we shift the energy, we get a different outcome. So you're looking at the situation saying, what is wanted? Well, what's wanted here is more connection with the family. What's wanted here is less conflict. What's wanted here is more productivity. What's wanted here is better team culture, overall. You might even find something more specific, like what is wanted is I'm making up the narrative between you and your brother, but I'm just using that as an example. Maybe what's wanted is recognition, acknowledgement, the desire to really be seen and understood by this person. And that could be either people or both people. For people who maybe feel like they're just killing themselves at work, what is wanted is more balance, more space, more ease. And then so you really take your time with these questions. I mean, there's certain circumstances that I have asked just these first two questions for sometimes weeks before I can really see the situation clearly. Because remember, most likely we're asking these questions when we've been caught in certain patterns for sometimes decades at a time, certainly months or years at a time. And then the third question is what's needed? If this is what has my attention and this is what's wanted, then what is needed? And it could be one step, it could be what's needed is for me to take a breath and actually disengage from the conversation and then come back. Maybe what's needed is for me to ask a different question. Maybe what's needed is for me to set a very specific boundary around where I stay when I'm with my family or where my family stays when they come to visit me. These are the last question is usually something that's very specific and actionable. And that's what helps you move from the old pattern into the new pattern. Because awareness is wonderful, but until we actually take action in a new direction, we're going to continue to repeat the same patterns. So you ask the questions in that order: what has my attention? What is wanted? And what is needed? And again, just a reminder that these should feel tricky. Like these should feel pretty tricky. Um, and it can take, depending on the complexity or the length of time that you've been in the problem, they can take some time. But when you practice asking them, I almost don't know a more effective set of questions.
They're a brilliant set of questions, actually. I think that and like you said, take your time in answering them because, maybe more complex than you think it is. But at the same time, and correct me, but at the same time, don't take too long because some
Right.
people overanalyze and overanalyze and
Yeah, thanks
overanalyze.
for naming that. Definitely. This is not a tool for perfectionism to
No,
weaponize.
from that perspective. Well, there's so many more things that we could have talked about, and we didn't get to your book. You wrote a book,
I did.
and I would love to be able to kind of share the book. We Are One. It it. Let me try. Let me start over. Let's talk about your book, your coaching business, and how somebody can reach you.
Mm. So my book is called We Are One: How One Woman Reclaimed Her Identity Through Motherhood. And it was very quite literally my sort of self-shamanic journey in the first year of motherhood to redefine, recreate, release who I was, recreate who I was becoming, very much through the challenges and struggles of motherhood. So it's part personal account, part spiritual teaching, part kind of entertaining storytelling. It's a pretty wild ride. And it's not really about motherhood. It's really about identity and growing through challenge. So, some of my biggest fans are men who don't have children, in terms of the book. So that's one way. And then if you feel inspired to bring me into your organization, you can reach out through my website about my Culture Shaman work. And then for those who are in or want to travel to the Denver area, I have Sacred Rage Alchemy, which is a pretty wild experience in the boxing gym that I co-own, where I guide people into somatic rage and allow them to really, really feel like much of the emotions that they've repressed their whole life, and turn them into something really useful and powerful. And then Sacred Sales is my work with entrepreneurs to help them learn how to actually use sales to essentially heal trauma and become the truest versions of themselves, but also become masterful at selling. And so those are the ways to work with me. And you can go to my website, which is vanessabrowerscoaching.com. But there's an easier one, which is thepowergift.com, the Power Gift. And you can go in and put in your information, and it's a really cool mini training that I do on reclaiming your personal power so that you can really implement a lot of what we talked about in this time today.
And that's amazing. And I'll make sure that that gets put into the show notes as well. And that way both will be on there. And all you have to do is follow that link in the show notes. It'll take them right to you. Vanessa, it's been an amazing conversation with you. Brilliant wisdom. And what a journey that you've had in life to bring you to where you're at now. Thank you for bringing to the world what you bring to the world. I think that bringing more of a human perspective to everything that we do in our lives is a valuable asset. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and creating such an incredible platform.
Well, I thank you. And I have one more question, though. This is one more thing before you go. So before we go, do you have any words of wisdom you can share?
Yeah. Let me think about it for a second. Life is always mirroring back to you exactly what you need for your next depth of healing, expression of self, or what do I want to say? I was going to add something about external results, but I don't really want to bring it in. It's no matter what is going on for you, what circumstance you're in, life is always trying to get your attention to try to give you more of what you want.
Brilliant words of wisdom. That works. Vanessa, again, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today. We had a great conversation, and I value that. And I will make sure that everything is in the show notes so people have an easy way to contact you. And thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you.
For everyone else out there, please make sure to like and subscribe and follow and do all that good stuff. And one more thing before you all go, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.